Like I said, guys, last week, Olivia walked us through all of the different days of the week that led up to Jesus' death. And then she kind of ended with Friday, Good Friday, where Jesus died and he was buried and he rested in the grave on Saturday and then was raised to life on Sunday. But today I just really want to talk about, and what we're going to hit on this week is really how Jesus' death is the most significant death in history. Like, pretty much, if you were to go through history books, you would find a lot of people who lived for a certain number of days, a certain number of years, and then you would find a day in which those people died. And as we think about some of the most significant ones, I was trying to think today of like, who are others that might compete for like the most significant death, like one that we would really know about or think about. I was thinking about George Washington, like, especially in America, he's kind of like the founding father, like the general that led the revolution, first president. Like, we have the Washington Monument, we have Washington, D.C. Like, we've really commemorated him in a lot of ways. His death was a pretty significant death. I thought about Abraham Lincoln, like, again, another holiday, and one that we in central Illinois maybe seem to focus on a little bit more, being the land of Lincoln. Like, Lincoln's death, his assassination is one that we commemorate. We remember his birth, his life, his death. For many people, the assassination of John F. Kennedy is one of those moments in history where a lot of people remember where they were when JFK was shot. Martin Luther King Jr. is another one that probably many of us, and maybe you see a lot of Martin Luther King Jr. quotes and things around in the news or different places. He's in our history books. We have a day, in which we celebrate his life and his work and his death. I was trying to get even outside of America. Like, if we think more worldwide, like a lot of people around the world have a high regard for like the work of Mahatma Gandhi, and they remember his death, or Mother Teresa, or even just this month, we were celebrating Columbus Day, like Christopher Columbus, this explorer, and I was just thinking through all of these really, really significant people in history. And for many of them, their deaths, their day in which they died was commemorated, or it's been written down in history books and we celebrate it. But none of those people, none of those deaths in particular were as significant as Jesus. And when I think about all of that, the question that we kind of left with last week was, why did Jesus die? And I just want you to think for a minute, like, sometimes we get so used to being in church and thinking about church things, or we've like gone to Easter every week of or every year of our lives, or we've heard people in church say like, well, Jesus died for this and that, Jesus died. It becomes almost this thing that we just kind of assume is like, oh yeah, that's what happened. But if you really think about it, like, Jesus was God. Like, he could have saved the world any way that he wanted to. Like, he could have, completely skipped death. He could have gone like straight to heaven. He could have just like fast tracked right up to heaven. Or he could have just like called down like legions of angels, the scriptures say. He could have called down legions of angels in the Garden of Gethsemane that would have just eliminated or wiped out the Roman Empire in its entirety. He could have brought the New Jerusalem, or he could have brought heaven to earth right away and just established his reign on earth. He could have opened up like a black hole in the universe somewhere and just sucked us all through into another reality. Like, he's Jesus. Like, he could have done any of those things. Now, the last one sounds a little bit more like the Avengers than the Bible, but Jesus could have done any one of those things. He's God. So why does he choose to die? Like, isn't that kind of crazy if you really think about it? Like, I could understand why people who don't grow up in church or people who aren't Christians kind of look at us sometimes and they're like, wait a second, like, your God, he died? Like, gods aren't supposed to do that. They're supposed to be all powerful. They're supposed to be all knowing. They're supposed to be invincible. How does he die? The better question, I think, is, why does he die? In fact, this was such a crazy thought that some of Jesus's closest followers couldn't even believe it. When Jesus told his closest followers that he was going to die, you know what Peter said? He's like, you can't. It's impossible. You can't die. You are God. You are the Christ. There's no way you could die. That's in Matthew chapter 16. We read a little bit last week in John chapter 12 when Jesus was in Jerusalem and the crowds were gathered there for the Passover. They were like, the Christ can't die. The Christ is supposed to live forever. There's no way that God would die. And Jesus said in John chapter 12, and we read this last week, he said that I'm going to be lifted up And in being lifted up, I'm going to draw all people to myself. That somehow his death on a cross would become the means by which everybody could catch a glimpse of God's heart. And that's what he said in John chapter 15, verse 13. He says, I'm going to show you the greatest act of love you've ever seen. I'm going to lay down my life for my friends. And that's what I want you guys to know tonight. Jesus didn't die because he doesn't like you. He didn't die because he's so mad at you. He didn't die because you're such a terrible sinner that he had to die. Jesus chose to die so that he could show you and I how much he loves us. He thinks of us as his friends. And so he says, I'm going to show you just how much our friendship is worth. I'm going to lay down my life because I care about you that much. And in my death, you and I, we're going to be reconciled. We're going to be redeemed. We're going to become pure and blameless before God. We're going to be made right with God because of this sacrifice that Jesus was making. That's how God draws all people to himself. So I want you to remember from last week, Jesus' death wasn't an accident. He chose to do it on purpose. And the reason he chose to do it was because he cares about you and I so much that he's willing to pay any and every price for us to be with him forever. That's why Jesus had to die. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit more as we get into our groups here. Remember, Jesus' death is the most significant death in human history. And so as we get ready to talk about that tonight, we're going to split up guys and girls. Guys, we're going to stay here. We're just going to make a circle, a big circle out of the chairs here together. And then girls, if you guys actually just want to go across the hall, you guys can have that whole room over there, ladies. And guys, we'll recircle these chairs up here together.